Hey guys, welcome. Come in, come in. Happy Tuesday night to you. Hope you're doing great. I hope you recovered wherever you are from this epic storm we had this weekend. Yeah, epic storm for us was about a quarter of an inch of ice, and that was it. So depending on where you are, right, hope you did well. So tonight I have a very special guest. We're going to be talking about anti-Semitism in the classroom. We have a very special guest, Daniel Greenfield. You've read him in FrontPage Mag. He is with David Horowitz's Freedom Center and has been working on this subject for many, many years. Daniel was one of a real favorite of Rush Limbaugh's. He would read his stuff all the time on air. Rush got a real kick out of Daniel. And the reason I love Daniel is because we're going to tell this story in a minute. He helped my family out of some of the darkest times that you could ever imagine. And a lot of you guys are going through that with your own children in your schools right now. And so we're going to be talking about how critical race theory kind of sets all ethnic groups up for disaster. So without further ado, Daniel, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me on to discuss these important issues.
Well, great. I mean, you're the expert, so we had to go to the king of the mountain to discuss this tonight. So I want to go back and tell everyone how we met. It was, if you can believe it now, 6 years ago or 7 years ago. But to put in perspective, my son was in first grade then. And Daniel, by the way, he's 13 and 6'1" right now.
He's not taller than me.
He's way taller than me. So he's not a kid anymore. But my kids at the time were going to a Jewish day school here in Durham, North Carolina. And we experienced critical race theory. Let me tell you how it showed up. First thing is, again, Jewish day school. They took the map of Israel off the wall. My son came home and he said, "Look, Mom, why are they taking the map of Israel off the wall? Apparently it's hurting people's feelings." That was my first clue that, what's going on, right? What's up? And then, like many of you guys, now you're going in to talk to your principal, to your superintendent, to your teachers, and they're saying, "Hey, wait a minute. So we're teaching about deconstructing whiteness, but you're a bigot for complaining. How dare you?" Right? So got that song and dance. Long story short, we said, "Look, we like what you have going here. It's great for some. We're out of here. My husband's Israeli. This is not going to work." And they ended up, out of vengeance, suing us. And so, Daniel, that was 7 years ago. And we then didn't know that Jewish institutions could be involved in boycotting the state of Israel. No one knew. And I really couldn't get anyone to believe me until I talked to David and Daniel and the crew over at FrontPage, and they not only believed it, they had been seeing this for a long time, and the rest is history. Daniel helped me at a time of great need where I needed help standing up, because as you know, parents, and you've been complaining at schools, sometimes you can feel like it's you and your family against the world, but it's really not, right? You've got a lot of friends in that. So Daniel, I want to thank you again for helping us navigate our way out of it and really do what journalists should do, be the voice for the aggrieved.
No, thank you for everything you've done since then. You've gone from someone who was fighting for her own family to fighting for so many people's families. And that's really a wonderful thing. It's what we do at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. You know, you started with David making his own particular journey and bringing in others of us, and, you know, having it just go down the line. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and this is what we try to do. We try to empower people to become activists themselves, to fight for the causes in their own backyard, because if they don't do what you've been doing in your own backyard, nobody's going to do it. No national organization knows your school, your family, your community as well as you do.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, we aim to put, our mission, and we're mission focused, just as the Freedom Center. And our aim is to restore morality and merit back in to the school system. You can restore morality and merit. You're going to get rid of critical race theory, the porn in the school, the racism we see, and you really will make, I hate to be cliche, America at least smarter again, right? I mean, that was what makes our nation a nation among nations, right? And so that's our mission, to do that. And we would love to turn 10,000 North Carolinians into investigative journalists, because I see, Daniel, you've got all these parents that are active and they're doing FOIAs and they're investigating these things. And we're really looking at possibly a renaissance in investigative journalism, getting these parents to do what Columbia trained journalists refuse to do and what the media establishment refuses to do.
Yeah, I mean, journalism at the media level is pretty much dead. It's all about a particular political narrative. At the same time, you have people who are feeling more and more empowered to actually go out there, to actually fight and make a difference. And we see just what that can do. And we saw what that can do in Virginia, but just locally, involvement is key, because, the people who have wrecked the system, who have done all this, they're the people who come early, they stay the latest, they volunteer the hardest, because they've cared the most. And so many of us have felt like, what can we do? We have jobs, we have things that we need to do full time. We're parents, we're employees. We don't have the energy, we don't have the stamina to do the things that they do. And as you've shown us, as you have shown us, so many parents have shown us, anybody can do this. It is challenging, but the bad guys, what they do, we can actually replicate it, and we can do better than what they've done. We can fight, we can take back the system, we can take back our children's schools. We can take back what they've taken from us.
Absolutely. You mentioned Virginia. Tell me what a good overview, because no one really breaks things down into bit pieces we can understand. What do you think the message is parents should take from Virginia?
It's that they matter, that when politicians stand up, as they did in Virginia, as the Democrats recently did, the Michigan Democrat Party posted a message stating that parental involvement is in schools. So, when you actually have parents being told directly that they don't matter, that they should not be involved in their children's education, that very much crosses a red line. It's something that any parent is infuriated by, especially after this year of school closures, after the repetition of school closures that are now being seen. A lot of people's patience has just been completely shot, which is entirely understandable. The pandemic has been challenging for all of us. It's been tough on all of us, but it's been especially challenging for parents, for working parents, for when there's a two-income family. It is really hard. And the degree to which parents have been gaslighted, to which they've been told that everything is fine, that they are the problem, that they're racist for somehow objecting to school closures, when actually those school closures have hurt minority parents, single parents the worst. This is really just blowing out a lot of people's fuses. And we're seeing the pushback on that. We're seeing the pushback across the country. That was part of what happened in Virginia, and it really attracts attention of parents, because a lot of parents really were passing by. They assumed that the school was doing its basic job. And, once they started looking more closely at what was going on, once they actually saw what was going on in Zoom classes, they became a lot more engaged on these issues.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm even seeing grandparents getting involved, and folks that don't even have kids saying, wait a minute, there's pornography that's in the libraries. No, we don't do that in this country. I mean, it's just common sense stuff. When we began, actually, we just turned a year old. We're about to turn a year old next week. But I did begin the December before that. And the first thing that I did was I stood up and stood out and said, boys don't belong in the girls' bathroom. I mean, it's duh. Is that obvious or what? But the people immediately drawn to this movement were young Black males, no children, hadn't been married, because it was so common sense for them. And they told me that they are sick and tired of being feminized. And so what they picked up on was this common sense message. It's not, Americans get it. We get it, right? We get it that this is not American. This is not, you're having what? I think at Yale and Stanford, you've got two boys who want to call themselves girls, and they were at the, I guess, semifinals of a swim meet, and two dudes won the meet, of course, right? I mean, this is a movement. This whole movement, we're going to talk about how it relates to the Jewish people, but it wants to erase women and feminize men. And everyday Americans get it.
I mean, this is the larger vision of the left, which is to deconstruct everything. You deconstruct the family, you deconstruct the country, you deconstruct sex, you deconstruct the very nature of what makes us who we are. And this is what the concept. It's what they consider to be creative destruction. They're going to take something, they're going to destroy it. And by the way, this is something that cults also do. They take you into these circles. They take apart your ideas of your identity, the building blocks of everything you took for granted, and then they give you this new identity, and you are now a member of the cult. This is how cults have always operated. Increasingly, we're seeing the same kind of cult programming across a variety of institutions, where yes, they begin deconstructing everything. You think that gender is real. You think that the family is real. You think that the country is real. No, all of these things are constructs. We're going to deconstruct them, and we're going to brainwash you with this exciting new identity. And people are increasingly reeling. They're in shock from this. They accepted some of it, but now, everybody hits a red line where they go, no, this is too much.
Yeah. And that's how it began. Obviously, as Jews, our core is Israel. It always has been. And so when you try to take that out of the identity of the Jewish people, which, I hate to say it, but, this movement hit the Jewish community first and was pretty successful here. They got success there and then, moved on. And it's now, of course, rotten and through the Christian church as well. So, it's the hallmark of a revolutionary period is institutional revolutionary zeal. Okay. So, and we have it. We've got it in the synagogues. We've got it in churches. We've got it in corporate America. We've got it in schools. We've got it in the military. Every institution, we've got it in the media. Every institution has this revolutionary zeal where they are going to, Daniel, as you say, deconstruct everything.
You began by talking about your experience in Jewish day schools. This is something that we see definitely in Jewish day schools, in liberal Jewish day schools, and in liberal Protestant ones. It's very much a factor. Paul Rossi recently came out with his material on that subject, for example, in New York. So really, you have these kinds of very liberal Protestant denominations, particularly Presbyterians. Their private schools are very much rotten with critical race theory, with all this campaign against whiteness. And these kinds of liberal Jewish schools that are very much built on the same model, they were built to copy them. In some cases, they were built to function as a parallel system to them, because back in the day, Jewish students were not necessarily admitted to those schools. So they built schools that very much resembled the liberal Protestant schools. So those are the institutions that are probably some of the most rotten. We have a large focus on public schools, and there's a huge problem with critical race theory in public schools, no question about it. But high-end private schools, whether they're liberal Christian, liberal Jewish, or secular, they're catastrophic. They're actually worse than most public schools. That's something people don't know.
Right. And then, and I can speak to that, guys. I've done everything. I've done public school. I've done private. I've done homeschool. And I can tell you firsthand experience, private school is not a panacea for what is ailing this country right now and ailing the school system, because that's governed by contract law. And once you sign a contract, okay, you've got to tolerate whatever they're selling for the entire year. And so my suggestion has always been, you need to put riders in those contracts where you spell out, and you will not add A, B, C, and D. Or why don't I just show you what you should add? Okay, this is what we're looking at here. Daniel, this is from the, we have a superintendent here in North Carolina by the name of Catherine Truitt, who is a Republican. This is her program for disabled preschoolers. So if you're going, like I said, if you're going to a private school, what have you, you need to make sure that you're saying, this doesn't belong in the classroom. So this is really this is the baseline. This is a perfect example of what critical race theory is. Whiteness is the thought that whiteness affects everything we bring to our interactions inside and outside the classroom. When we use clarifying conversations, we deconstruct whiteness, exactly what you said. What do we think clarifying conversations mean here?
No, the bad guys here, they keep talking about conversations, about dialogue. Inevitably, by all those things are synonyms for programming, for when it comes to children, manipulating them, telling them how they should view the world. And this is very dangerous, obviously, in the educational setting, because parents and children come expecting to be told how things work. And this is a case where they're actually being programmed, they're being brainwashed to think of how the world really does work. And this, first of all, obviously creates racial hostility, which it is meant to. And it also turns students into activists, which is really the fundamental part that it's meant to accomplish. It also obviously breeds all sorts of resentments. It divides up students. It encourages them to be part of an affinity with some or a series of groups. Who you are a queer transgender, you are disabled, you are a member of an oppressed group. And as a member of an oppressed group, you are expected to advocate against a member of the oppressor group. And it encourages students to join one of these groups. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck in the evil white oppressor category. So it's a very effective piping mechanism for actually taking students who are ordinary enough and encouraging them to adopt radical identities. We've seen this with the success of the transgender movement. A lot of this is really about students who are trying to get away from being seen as being in the oppressor group.
Correct. And that's why you've got so many conversions into, I don't want to be my gender. I'm going to go into something else. And I'm going to show you that intersectionality chart in just a second. By the way, that intersectionality chart is usually how Jews actually get hammered, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is, again, deconstructing whiteness. And Damon, you said this when I've been looking at the material. It is deconstructing. That's what they're doing. If you had this for deconstructing Black or brown children, all hell would break loose, and understandably, it should.
Yes. Well,
So
their idea of whiteness is something that can infect anybody, can infect Black people, can infect Latinos. They're suffering from internalized whiteness. So on the one hand, it obviously is an invocation that white people are evil and racist, but it's also this magic power, this evil magic power that white people have can get into Black people and can get into all sorts of minorities, and it can take them over. And now, of course, they're possessed by the evil whiteness virus. And I mean, I'm ridiculing this, but this is very much effectively what they believe.
Well, frequently, I mean, we have a number of Black people on my team. They're called white supremacists. I'm called an anti-Semite. I kid you not.
Yeah.
Because we dare to take on something that isn't traditionally done in our group.
Yeah. If you're Black and you come on time and you have a good work ethic and you're aspiring to be a member of the middle class, you are now considered to be suffering from internalized whiteness. And again, this is not something I'm making up. If you look at Black Lives Matter materials, if you look at the stuff that's being put up on so many of these equity trainings, this is pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, this is also from the same training. Again, what you're looking at is a statewide program here in North Carolina that's being conducted from the top down for taking money for disabled preschoolers and now using that all over the state. This is supposedly that program. We supposedly put a halt to it. Time will tell. So this is what we're talking about with intersectionality, where if you're a European American from the U.S., you speak English, white, male, heterosexual, Christian, you are toast, right? You are bottom rung. So again, this isn't only about Jews. This critical race theory takes aim directly. By the way, this is public school that's promoting this here in North Carolina. This is paid for by federal dollars, and it's propagated by somebody you wouldn't think, a Republican. Right? So it crosses all boundaries, Daniel.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is absolutely everywhere. And you have this phenomenon where people adopt these things. Some sort of radical academic begins pushing a theory. It gets mainstreamed into academia. And then so many people who are in theory on paper Republicans, they're members of the business community, but they're really upper middle class type of people who really don't do the research themselves. They just adopt the stuff. They read the Washington Post. They think they're now well informed. They read the New York Times. They think they're well informed. They see people who seem authoritative, who seem like experts, and they absolutely receive this. They take this in, they adopt it, and they will fight to defend it, even while on paper seemingly being conservative.
Yeah, and that's what we see. And I tell people all the time, look, for Republicans, their position has always been, hey, school choice, school choice, school choice. We're going to cede the education system to the left. And that's what happened. That's what has happened. And now all of a sudden they want to take on the mantle of we're going to defend CRT. I like this. People like that. We want a group to take that on. But how do they know what it is? How do they know how to stop it? I mean, this is just a new territory for them. They haven't been in the trenches like, say, we have, fighting this. You and I have been reporting on anti-Semitism on campus for 6 years now for me. And, you know, that gave me great experience to go in and say, okay, you know, if you can fight BDS on the campuses and expose that, this is, you know, this is going to be no sweat. But again, you know, you need to trust but verify people. So when you're talking to your favorite candidate running for office, you need to make sure they're not giving lip service to saying, I'm going to stand up to these radicals who have taken over our institutions. You're going to need proof, and you're going to need plans on how they plan to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, especially after Virginia, so many people suddenly jumped on the bandwagon. We are against critical race theory, but they have not done the work. They don't understand what actually is going on. They just have this 5-minute briefing and they go into it. There's no real meaningful commitment to it. It's just this issue of the moment. And, you know, when another issue comes up, they switch to that issue and they completely let this go. And this is very much a huge problem with actually implementing structural reform, which is, again, it's really important that activists like you are the ones who are actually staying engaged, who are actually doing the work, because honestly, you cannot count on the politicians to do the work.
Right. And, you know, it's a hard job they have, right? Here in North Carolina, I mean, a state senator makes $13,000 a year and sacrifices a good amount of their time. So we appreciate anyone being willing to serve. That's great. But we have had, and I think it's because a lot of folks in office are scared of us, we've had not a lot of phone calls from legislators, unless they're really comfortable with themselves asking, hey, you're talking about this particular bill. What do you think about this? There's not a lot on that. Luckily, we're kind of half of a think tank as well, and we're getting out these stories and kind of some position pieces. But, you know, there's got to be some way that parents and activists like us have a bridge, Daniel, to go and to be able to speak with people making these policies, not post hoc, but before it happens.
This is why this kind of investigative journalism that you do is really important. It's important to continue actually making the issue the focus, because again, the reality with politicians is that if it's trending right now, then they're engaged with it. If people seem to be interested in it, if they're getting a bunch of calls and letters from their constituents telling them this is something we care about, they will be engaged in it. It's very important. Also, the reality is to get, certainly at the congressional level, at levels that are really policymaking levels, to get people into those offices when you actually have people who actually are hiring multiple staffers, to get a staffer in there who's focused on education, who is informed, who understands this. And this is how the left has done. It's how they've colonized so much of politics. They get in their people, they take in their people from their think tanks, they get them in the staffers, and those people actually set the policy, because so many of the politicians have absolutely no idea what's going on. Their staffers lead them around by the nose. They know what's going on. And really, this is the next step. This is the challenge for the next step, is to get those people into the offices.
Right, exactly. People who either know what they're doing, or they know that they don't know everything and they can't be a jack of all trades. And we really do need that. So let's talk about some buzzwords here. So culturally responsive teaching, that is always going to be critical race theory. We're, again, a lot of people are uninformed. We're hearing from some journalists who are education journalists and who should know better, that think culturally responsive teaching is okay. Equity as well. Let me tell you guys what equity means. Equity means in education right now, it means equality of outcomes, period. Equality of outcomes versus equality of opportunity. There's a big difference. Everyone should get the opportunity to do some, and we're all at different levels. Take, for instance, children who are disabled. They're going to need a lot of help to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. That's fine. But this presupposes that folks who have disproportionately, this is their word, disproportionately benefited from white supremacy, right? That they need to get in the back of the line. That means Asian Americans, definitely means Jewish Americans, and it also means Indian Americans. And they are saying that you've gotten more then you deserve and you need to get in the back of the line. Now, when we look at discrimination and crime, in particular, religious discrimination, Jews make up the lion's share of the victims of, like we had this weekend, of terror attacks, of targeting. So it's like, let me get this straight. We're going to go to the bottom of some line you have. Plus, we're the number one on the hit list for people that want to do harm to people. How do we explain that, Daniel? I mean, it's grossly unfair.
Yes. But this is the artificial black and white model that they're operating under, which is obviously not just about white supremacy, though they continually use that term. It's anti-capitalistic. It dates really back to 19th century opposition to capitalism, which associates any kind of prosperity, any kind of achievement with evil. And thus in America, they fused the two together. They fused race and anti-capitalism to say, if you're successful, as a lot of immigrants are, for that matter, as you mentioned, Asian immigrants, then you're somehow benefiting from white supremacy when actually you're just benefited from a meritocratic culture. You've benefited from a success-oriented culture. And this is absolutely catastrophic for everybody. Obviously, it's particularly catastrophic for Jews because Jews are a minority group, yet they're also a very high-achieving minority group. As a result, Jews are accused of being on the white supremacist side as insane enough as it is to accuse people who, in some cases, themselves were the victims of Nazi Germany. In some cases, their children, their grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. But this obviously is absolutely irrational. It's senseless if you actually start breaking it down by specific examples, much like saying that a black man is a white supremacist. Yet they will make these completely irrational arguments because these exist in the realm of abstract academic theory. They have nothing to do with how people actually operate. And this is really the overall crisis of the system because the left develops these academic theories that are absolutely detached from human nature. When they implement them, the results are absolutely disastrous because they do not take into account any normal reality. And whether it's the Soviet Union or whether it's the educational system in America, it's all really the same thing because these abstract theories do not take into account how people actually live. And certainly when it comes to Jews, they take absolutely nothing into account. So Jews end up as scapegoats for the system. As the America's Asian population continues to grow, they're going to become even bigger scapegoats, part of the subset of the battles in Virginia, now in New York and San Francisco, are about taking away merit-based education from Asian people. So
right.
You have the growing violence against Asians. We've had some horrible recent examples of that, including the murder of a woman in New York City who was Asian. And, they roll it into stop hate against Asian Americans, much as they roll into the synagogue attack into stop hate against Jews, yet they never actually discuss who was responsible for this. What are the underlying causes of the situation? They just try to pretend it's all somehow white supremacy, even when the people conducting this violence are now remotely white people.
Well, correct. I mean, look, when you gin up hatred, you go into neighborhoods in Brooklyn and you gin up hatred towards landlords, right? And then you let the chips fall where they may, and then they do. And then you're out there saying, wow, listen, this hatred. It's, it's perverse what's going on. I mean, you're making this a cauldron for children in this case. And so you're seeing in schools, Daniel, is a microcosm of what you're seeing in Brooklyn. They're taking out all of the law enforcement. They're creating these highly inflammatory narratives. And they're even telling Black children, hey, listen, you're never going to be anything. You need to accept it. You're not wanted in America. You've never been wanted. You're not going to be anything, and blame them. It's really horrible stuff. And that's what they're doing. And a lot of folks say, well, you know what? I'm just going to take my kids out of school. I'm not worried about it. Well, I'll tell you this. This is America. And in this country, we don't allow, especially with taxpayer dollars, for children to be really brutalized in some cases while, we're off doing whatever. I mean, we're very big into taking care of worrying about other nations, right? But right in our own backyard, we have gross, massive human rights abuses, the likes of, Mao during the Cultural Revolution and the Four Olds program, which sought to deprogram, right? To distinguish the old culture, old habits, old belief, old traditions. And that's what this deconstruction model you talk about really is.
And it's everyone's problem, whether or not they have children in public school, whether or not they have children, because you are still going to be dealing with the impact on society. The public school system is still the biggest reservoir, the biggest educational system in the country. I'm not a product of it. I'm a product of traditional Jewish schools. Our children will go to traditional Jewish schools, but it doesn't mean that we can pretend that it doesn't affect us, even beyond the obviously the expenditures as taxpayers. It very much affects us because we are going to be interacting with the products of the system. This is the system that is meant to shape America. It's meant to shape the leaders of tomorrow and just the people we deal with in everyday life. If you have a system that is teaching even 10% of the next generation to hate, that is going to be catastrophic in terms of the future of the country and in terms of our future.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a question here from Amy. By the way, I know Amy, she's a friend of mine, and she's a very big fan of yours. I just have to tell you that. So do you expect North Carolina will develop a requirement for ethnic studies as California has? Well, Amy, this is a great question. So I want to explain this to all of you here. When you look at California and their ethnic studies program, which we've been covering for the last 3 years at least, that is a requirement for high school, all high school students in California. It is it's a downright anti-Semitic curriculum, and it's just plain bizarre, but it is critical race theory to the extreme. Again, high school. Will it be enacted in North Carolina? Let me tell you this. In North Carolina, we have California from pre-K all the way up to high school. So we already, to answer your question, yes. So we've got it in a couple of ways. We've got the social studies curriculum, which again is kindergarten through 12. So North Carolina is the most radically far left progressive state in the nation for education, as evidenced by this pre-K program for disabled children. This is insane. So number one, we have it in the social studies curriculum, full stop. Number two, we have something called social emotional learning. SEL also brings in this deconstructing whiteness, this whole, everything we just showed you. So that is also in kindergarten through 12 in all 12 academic areas. That means in math, homeroom, science. This critical race theory will be placed in all subjects. So North Carolina is far worse than California. And I know because we have 2 chapters there. So our goal here, Daniel, is to, and I think we're starting to do it now, is to raise the alarms for everyone in the United States that you need to check out North Carolina because we are a cautionary tale. We have been run by Republicans, at least, the school system has at the very top. And then we've had, the state house controlled by Republicans. But again, and what you mentioned, if there's no attention to it, if it doesn't get measured, it won't be taken care of. In this state, 56% of the state spending is on education. That's where all the money is. So that only the left has been covering it in the news is very concerning. We're up against 14, at least 14, well-funded, usually by George Soros and Gates, education groups like us. There's 1 to 14.
Yeah, this is unfortunately what happens because the sheer weight of funding, as far as the think tanks go, obviously you mentioned George Soros, other left-wing educational groups, and obviously the teachers' unions themselves form this really massive force. So when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to organization, when it comes to even basic industry trade material, it's very much coming through these various institutions, which are themselves in some cases funded by, say, the textbook publishers, which are themselves giant monopolies and have lobbies that are intertwined with the various unions, with the various other educational organizations. So there is this massive educational industry, this educational industrial complex, as I call it, that is built around left-wing politics. And is very much focused on getting this done. And it's very much benefits from having this churn, from having a constant flow of new materials. So something like critical race theory is really good for you if you're a textbook publisher, because suddenly you have an excuse to tell school districts, burn all your old materials. These are the new materials we want. And this is very much also something that the left does. It has this symbiotic relationship with seemingly capitalist, I wouldn't really call them capitalist, but corporate interests, who themselves also benefit from wrecking everything and then creating this new thing to overlap it, to overtake it. So against that, you have parents, and the parents don't have a fraction of the resources, the money, and the energy and the time that these organizations have. And these organizations benefit. They benefit financially from this destruction, whereas parents do not. And they have to do this on their free time, sometimes losing money, sometimes giving up family time in order to do this. It's a complete David versus Goliath situation.
Right, which is why we need organizations like ours. We hope that many more start here, and in every state. I mean, again, when I say that I want to put 10,000 investigative journalists or investigators on the ground in North Carolina, we really mean it. So we train youth to do this, to know the laws around videoing and filming in school to get us raw evidence. We have a tip line, and we have this an army of incredible investigators. I've never seen anything like it, who are already doing this work. And so I think that kind of watchdog investigations, that can also help even the score, because exposure is king, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, getting all this out is really where we need to be. And so, and when we talk about you know, this critical race theory in the classroom, another way it's showing up is Holocaust minimization. And that is when you've got, you know, teaching the Holocaust, which thank goodness now in North Carolina, that is the law. But there are critical race theory practitioners who believe that that takes away from the story that, or the narrative rather, that African Americans are the ones that are victimized the most. So can you tell us a little bit about Holocaust minimization and anti-Semitic minimization, which we're seeing from the FBI now, incidentally?
Well, if you're a believer in critical race theory, and if you judge people based on, as King said, not the content of their character, but simply entire race, and a lot of these people really don't know much actual history, and you're looking at the Holocaust, you're looking at all this, and this is supposedly about, as they put it, white Jews, and why are we spending all this time talking about what happened to these so-called, again, white Jews, especially now that they can do some Israel bashing and throw that on top of that as the cherry. So there's a lot of resistance to Holocaust curriculums. And, you know, part of the problem is the Holocaust curriculum itself in many cases pushes this kind of general universalization. The takeaway message is that nationalism is bad and that everybody suffers at some point. And it makes it very easy to go to the next stage, which is that Jews are the real villains. Yes, the Jews might have been the victims in the Holocaust, but then the Jews built up the state of Israel and they became the new Nazis, which is very much this really core idea that anybody can be the Jews, anybody can be the Nazis. All this is entirely interchangeable. There's no really meaningful history. It's all about power analysis. And though much of what we've been talking about really does break down to this kind of power analysis, because the left breaks down everything to their so-called power analysis. There are people of power, there are people who don't. Hatred of people who have power is completely justified. Of course, they themselves insist that they have no power whatsoever, no matter how much power they have. But they will insist in seeing everything through the lens of punching up or punching down. They're the ones who are punching up, and they're entitled to punch up at anybody who is above them in any way they can while doing any amount of damage. Thus, for example, this kicks in with racism. Is racism bad? No, racism is only bad if you are punching down at people who have less power than you do. But if you have racial hatred for people who have more power, like, say, the Jews or white people in general, then your racism is completely justified because you're just the oppressed. So no behavior is really wrong. No ugliness, no racism is really wrong. What's wrong is having power, which obviously the Jews are on the wrong end of that.
Right, right. And we see that in school with again, the minimization of the Holocaust. I mean, look, every horror is terrible, whether we're talking about the internment camps or we're talking about slavery or any of this stuff. And so teaching it that you've got to have an Olympics of the oppressed is definitely the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah. And, you know, I should say, really, this was the Nazi argument itself that paved the way for the Holocaust. The Jews have far too much power. The Nazis themselves argued that they were punching up. You know, they've just adopted the Nazi argument while insisting that they're actually anti-racist.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting way to put that, because the original anti-racists were, you know, the Nazis. I mean, that was their whole shtick, is that we are we're taking on the mantle of defending, you know, morality, when in fact, it's anything but. And it's just the kind of gaslighting that we're getting here when you've got these hardcore CRT pushers doing the same thing.
It's also important to remember that the Nazis were above all racialists. We have this kind of distorted idea that the Nazis were just white supremacists. The Nazis actually, obviously, they had a close alliance with Japan, and there was this argument that the Japanese were somehow Aryans, but they also had black soldiers. They had Arab soldiers in the Free Arabian Legion who were there as part of the Mufti of Jerusalem. I won't get into all of that history, but it ties into Hamas and a lot of Islamic anti-Semitism. They had a diverse coalition. It was easily as diverse as the Allies were. The difference between the Nazis and the Allies was not that one was diverse and the other was not, which is the kind of bad history we often get. It was that the Nazis were racial essentialists. This was the doctrine of Hitler. It's the doctrine of Mein Kampf, which is that race mattered above all else. Whereas in America, you could be from different backgrounds and you could work together. To the Nazis, everybody had to be in their own race. They had to be in their own lane. And only on those terms could you work together. And there were superior races and inferior races. And this was really the dogma that very much exists today by the very same people who are very quick to call everybody else a Nazi, yet they've adopted the racialist essentialism of the Nazis, the idea that some races are better than other races. This really governs their entire worldview. Some races should have privileges, others should not. We need to spend all our time discussing exactly who is what race and what the racial priorities within that arrangement should be. This is Nazi racial essentialism. It's in our schools, it's in our political system.
Absolutely. And again, perpetrated by both sides. And if we don't get it under control, I mean, we're done. And I keep telling people, I give us 18 months. There's a political solution for this, but there's a caveat there. Unless we hold all leaders accountable for the promises they're making to eradicate this, we're not going to see any progress. Look, I really don't know if you can legislate your way out of what's going on right now. It's going to have to be from the bottom up.
I mean, legislation is a partial answer. What's really important is getting people who actually trust it, who understand the issues, who have honor and integrity into the system to actually make a difference. Because the bottom line is, how did the left take everything over? They went into the system. They took it over, and there are two options, one of which is to reclaim the system. And you're not just going to do that through elections. The other is, frankly, to burn the system down. And, we have a ticking clock for reclaiming the system, because at some point the system itself just becomes too rotten to be reclaimed. And I hope that does not happen, but we are facing a crisis in this regard.
Absolutely. And so action. That's what matters here, you guys. So to get involved, for some of us, posting an article or posting this video, that is for you something you haven't done before, and that's getting involved, right? I mean, there's multiple levels. Daniel and I, we write, we do things like this. So it's whatever you can do, but just to do something. And just figure out what that is. So again, sharing this broadcast, critically important. I know a lot of you are in several groups. We get most of our viewers, if you can believe it, through Facebook. I know that it's something that people are not watching or whatever, but we've gotten a lot through that. So share. Yeah. So honor and integrity are two things the left don't have. Yeah. I mean, that it's unfortunate because 10 years ago, I think that was different. I think that, the left really appreciated civil liberties, very strong on free speech. And now you see them, I mean, they are tyranny loving, censorship loving, just willfully ignorant people.
I mean, this was part and parcel of the destruction of character in the country in general. The conviction that now that the left is actually ascendant, that it has to do everything possible to crush the opposition, and really the motivating force of hate, which is we're seeing more and more. There's constant rage, there's constant anger, there's constant hatred, and that does bad things to their character.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is. Yeah, I mean, you're right. They think this is the window of opportunity, and you're really seeing the tyrannical roots come out. Now, I want to tell you guys that we're winning. We don't want to completely dispirit you. I mean, we've got Virginia, right, where everyone, I think, came together and worked through this. In North Carolina, we're up against it. Again, we have someone in control from the top down who is pushing this stuff while saying that she's not, right? So again, you're seeing now it's not a party thing, it's a power thing. And so getting involved is very important. Feeling like you don't have any power is not good. So again, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, sign up for these things, share these things. But we're definitely winning. You can tell, because when the left starts fighting to push for the right to have hardcore porn inside of schools, inside of middle schools, that's how you know they've lost their damn mind. This does not play well. And I'll tell you, you've got a lot of foreign-born people who came here for a better life for themselves and their children. They don't have anything in common with these far-left progressives at all. Nothing in common with them. And that's why you need to be going to church, going to meetings, literally knocking on neighbors' door, showing them what's going on, because a lot of them probably are afraid to speak up. They think they're the only ones feeling this way. You have to show them that they're not.
That's very true. So many people feel isolated, and this is what the left does. It manufactures a narrative. It imposes from the top down and creates this illusion of consensus, because everything you see in the media, everything that's promoted is pushing this narrative. When people actually start seeing other people come out, speak, just even post something on Facebook, they realize they're not alone. There are actually more of us than we realize. And there comes a point where suddenly you realize we're actually the majority.
Yeah, and we absolutely are. I mean, you're talking about, this is, look, everybody knows boys do not belong in the girls' bathroom, period, end of discussion. And to actually be at this point, Daniel, where we're having to talk about this, weren't we talking about Me Too 5 minutes ago? And now women don't even have the right, girls don't have the right to have the word girls on the freaking bathroom?
The left is seeing what it can get away with. This is what it's pushing, whether it's the porn in middle schools, whether it's the bathroom attacks. They're seeing how far they can push. And so far, they've managed to push very far. And once they get the sense that there's no limit, they start going really crazy, because really then they decide there is really nothing stopping us from doing absolutely anything we want. And, this is what you see, whether it's crime, whether it's children who are acting out, they push you, they test boundaries, they see how far can we push. And, we're seeing this at an adult institutional level. How far can they push?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to stand up to bullies. You don't have the luxury not to. So, well, I really want to thank you for coming on and speaking eloquently about this, because, the good news is that as a society, global society, we've been here before, right? We've had the Mao Revolution, we've had the Bolsheviks, but there's no real analog for that in American history. So this is sort of a first for us, right? That we're going through this sort of revolution.
The closest thing analog to this was what happened in the 60s and the 70s. For a lot of Americans, we thought that it went away. That's exactly correct, like a rebellious child. And it hasn't. It's made a comeback, and it's stronger, and it's more dangerous than it was before. And this time we either win, we defeat it, or we're going to be swept under. That's the unfortunate reality.
Right. And so you need to pick what you're good at and do it, and then pick what way that you want to get better. We're offering FOIA classes. We're offering op-ed writing classes. And you need to, we're called, our master 501c3 is Pen and Shield for a reason, right? The shield is obviously to defend the citizenry, but the pen is mightier than the sword, right? To expose this type of wrongdoing. And believe you me, look, we got into this situation by being mollified by the media and being lied to by the media. You cannot pull off this level of revolution without having propaganda through the media. So as I see it, we're going to get out the same way we got in, and that is spreading the word. That is investigating. That is sharing what you have here. This is how we're going to get out of this, by informing the citizenry, and we've got to cut through the BS that's being propagated, usually by the left.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you very much for tonight, Daniel. Thank you very much. And guys, we're going to have another broadcast on Thursday night, and we will see